Hello and welcome to week 4. In this lecture, I'm going to be talking about performance improvement and interactivity. Although e-learning can offer interactive and engaging learning experiences, the more creative ideas are necessary to really create an exciting environment for students. These are not always easy to design, but I'm going to give you some ideas this week of how you might create more interactivity in a class that you might be designing in the future. Instructional designers and instructors certainly see the benefits of engaging students, especially the adult learner who wants to have an active adult learning community. And we've talked about that learning community before. By capitalizing on unique capabilities of web-based technologies, online courses can facilitate that interaction in an exciting, interactive, purposeful, and beneficial manner. With innovative ideas, we can develop e-learning activities that lead to meaningful learning experiences and engage the students in many new ways. So students don't have to just write papers or read documents. They can truly get involved. You are certainly familiar with the use of online technologies such as discussions or chat rooms or even email as a way to get students to interact. These kinds of activities can certainly be peppered throughout any course, whether it's an online class or one of our hybrid or blended learning type classes. But I'm going to be talking in this lecture about even more exciting ways to get students to interact with each other. We don't necessarily want to do group activities because we know from the adult learning theory that many adults prefer to learn individually and not in groups. But these activities are things that can get one or two students working together. In a previous lecture, I talked about how the traditional teaching methods can sometimes find their way into a hybrid or an online class. So much like the activities that you might find in a traditional class or the games that might be used in traditional classroom teaching, these e-learning activities that we're going to talk about can be used by instructors to accomplish a variety of goals. And those goals might be things like introducing students to each other, sharing experiences, increasing participation, and encouraging learners to develop constructive relationships that they can use throughout this class and possibly even into their future careers. For many online students and even online instructors, this is a brand new environment for them. And so we want to provide a richness of experiences. We want to teach them some technological skills and some communication skills so that they are prepared for future classes like this, maybe all online or even continuing with taking some hybrid classes. But we also want to improve the learner participation. We want to make sure that our learning objectives are being met. And we want to make sure that this online environment is an exciting place for both the instructor and the student. Developing interactive activities for e-learning should not be time-consuming and it should not be difficult. But before you really start to develop your activity, you may want to ask yourself several questions. And I'm going to put these questions on the screen as I talk about each one. The first one is, what is the experience of your learners? Are they quite competent in the e-learning world? Is the instructor competent in facilitating interactive e-learning? What training does that instructor need? What technologies are available with your e-learning learning management system? Will it accommodate the game or the activity that you're going to develop? And next, do students have the technical skills? So don't make your game or your activity so difficult that all students in the class can't do it. You might want to consider what pre-activities you would have to offer the students if they're not highly computer literate. You want to prepare them for using your game or your interactive activity so that they're having fun with it and they are actually interacting. And then you need to consider, what's the time frame? How long should this activity take your students? Remember, we have to consider the number of hours with those Carnegie units that we talked about before. The last two things you should want to ask yourself before you start to develop your activity is, what are the learning outcomes that this activity is going to achieve? Those are very important. Remember, we must cover the learning outcomes in each and every course. And then, does this help you achieve the goals of this course, or is it just a fun activity? So consider these things when you are starting to build your own learning activities. For the next part of this lecture, I want to give you some examples that might be good interactive activities for the e-learning student. And the first one is something that most all professors of some at one point or other uses in the traditional classroom. This also fits well in the hybrid class, and it's just let me introduce myself. So what I like to do is have the students interview somebody else in their e-learning class. And you may pair them up. I usually do that myself. I will have the students look at the roster, and the first two are paired, the third and the fourth are paired, and one student is that person who interviews the other, and then that student who was the interviewer writes a little update, a little 2 or 3 paragraphs about their new friend, and then they switch places. So in that way, they get to know each other and they get to be interactive in the class. This next activity I call Websites About Myself, and this really is one of my favorites. If you don't want students to work in pairs or work in groups, as what they would have to have done with the Introduce Myself, in this way, they can work individually. So the student has to think about, what are their hobbies, what are their backgrounds, what do they like to do, and then each student should present to the group maybe 3 or 4 different websites that help others understand their hobbies and their interests. So instead of just saying, I like to go cycling, I like to swim, I like to ski, and they have to now find websites that tell those things. So it's just a little twist, and it makes them be a little bit more creative. And then I always have the students discuss. So each student in the class has to make a comment or two about someone else's post to the forum or post to the discussion when they're introducing themselves through a website. In previous lectures, I've talked about the importance of giving students real-world experiences. And I think this next interactive activity does that. I like to provide students with current news that somehow relates to the topic that we are discussing. Or I have students look for current news that has to do with the topic that we're discussing. That way, they really get a better view of what's happening besides what they can read in the textbook or what I can present in a lecture. So they're getting a real-world experience on the same topics, and it's easily relating to the learning outcomes and the goals for the class. The last activity that I want to share with you is called a group blog. And in this way, students do get to work individually, but their thoughts and their research all gets put together in one place. To do this, you create the blog. which is really very easy to do, and we'll be discussing that later in this class. This is like creating a course journal. The blogs can be used to encourage students to work together on reflecting on their course experiences. By engaging students in group activities in which they can each contribute individually to a single online blog, you're creating an online learning community that really reflects on both the positive and the negative aspects of the students' course experiences. As an instructor or a designer, these blogs can give us so much information about things that might need to be changed in a course. They also can show us how students do interact. So you'll be learning more about blogs later on in this class. Well, I said that the blog was my last idea, but as I looked back on my notes, I find there's still one more I want to share with you. And this one is games for interaction. I think creating games is really a fun, creative activity for students to get really involved with the class. You can create easy games, and I'll be showing you how later, using just PowerPoint. So it's kind of like a multiple choice quiz, but if they answer the wrong thing, it takes them to a screen that gives them some more information. It's always nice to give the students a chance to be creative in their PowerPoint game. And believe it or not, when you're creating a game or a quiz, you really have to know the material. So I've had students do this in the past, and the material they use in their game is the material that they are really expert at. So we'll be doing that later in the class. Think right now, though, about the other students in the class that you're in. What kind of game, what kind of topics would you like to have for them? And then go back and think about those questions I asked earlier in this lecture. These are only a few of the hundreds of ideas that are available if you do a little research on the internet. These interactive activities do enhance learning, and they create collaborative environments, especially for online students. Remember from the research that we've read or heard about in this class already, that when students feel involved in the class, the rate of retention goes up, the learning goes up, and the enjoyment of the class is also heightened. You want students to have a little bit of fun while they're learning and to really use what they're learning in some creative new ways. So I hope you'll take a minute and think about additional interactive activities that you might want to add to a class one day.